Welcome, everyone, to episode 29 of Caster Calls to ZombieGrub. I am here with Jason Kaplan, J Kaplan, J Cap. I feel like I've heard
Ugh.
all of these things. You've been called all these things. And I'm so glad that you actually had time to come on. Thank you so much. For I know you've been very busy. I just got picked up with a CSGO gig, which actually is pretty damn cool. But I'll let you talk more about that as we get into the podcast. But yeah, you just we kind of just start off by letting you tell your story and how you've gotten to your current point. So, how did you first get involved in the esports on air side of things?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say for anyone out there listening, I'm not Jeff Kaplan from Overwatch. I'm not Jordan Kaplan, the Call of Duty player. I'm not Jackson Kaplan, a coach for some Overwatch League team, or the other million J Kaplans that are out there that I always get confused with, or Sirius J, who does the Howard Stern show. I'm not him either. I get a lot of those DMs. For me, my whole casting career started. I guess it's a little bit of a sad, bushy story. And I'm so glad my girlfriend's right next to me to hear this because she's going to be so happy. It's about a breakup I had. So I used to play video games a lot, like dating back to when I was younger. I have a brother and a sister, both older. They never really got along with me that much, but they got along together pretty well. Well as they can be for siblings, I guess. So they would go out and like do stuff together, and I would kind of be like left alone with no one to play with. So I started to play video games a lot as like a way to do something, right? And my parents always like encouraged me to kind of doing that. I think I'm starting maybe a little bit too far back. Maybe I can go further.
Oh,
So my
that's
mom,
okay.
my mom and dad met a long time ago. So I play video games a lot, and my dad was always supportive of it in terms of like he'll buy me, a game that I really want, or surprise me with like the next generation of a console that came out. And by next generation, I mean like the Super Nintendo because I'm very old. So they always supported it. My dad would play with me, my brother once in a while. My sister didn't really care much about video games. So fast forward like 20 something odd years. I'm with my first girlfriend, and we both played video games quite a bit together. We played like Left 4 Dead back then. That was like my first big esports game, I guess you could say, though I did play like the likes of Counter-Strike back in the day, a little bit of StarCraft Road War, even though it was absolutely garbage. But the bound maps were my favorite. Um, so playing video games a lot, had a breakup, and I kind of like I got very depressed. I was even like a little bit suicidal at some points because of what happened with all the breakup and everything like that. And I had no job at the time, and I had this idea of like, I want to try to give YouTube a chance. I want to see if I can make anything of myself from that. And luckily, my parents were supportive of that. They said, "Okay, we'll give you 6 months. You can try to make it work, but after that, if it doesn't work out, you need to get a real job." So I was playing a lot of League of Legends back then, and I would say decently ranked. I was like 1900 around there. If anyone knows League from back in the days before they had this tier system that they currently use, and this like league system. And in one of these games, I met a guy named Nat Nguyen who was a pro player back then. And I asked him because he's on the other team, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting up this interview series. Would you be interested in potentially being on it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So I got in contact with him. I did my first interview series called Ulton 10 with him. And from him, he led me to the likes of like Dyrus, Double Lift, Salse, like pretty much any big league player you could think of back in the day that even some of them are still relevant today. I did some interviews with. And I realized that like these are nice, but in terms of like making revenue, it's not really gonna work out too well at the time because people didn't really care that in depth about pro players. So I kind of like theorized and thought about for a while like what kind of new video content I could make. And this is the one that kind of like broke me out for the pack. I made this interview series, or not interview series, a series called oh my gosh, I can't remember the name. Oh my god, how did I not remember the name? It was like a Mythbusters like type series.
uh,
So it's basically like if this happens and that happens, what would be the outcome? I'm actually really mad that I don't remember the name. So I did this little series, and it got some steam. Riot ended up seeing this video. They ended up promoting the video. I had like 400,000 hits on one video alone from it. And that kind of got me in contact with some like other YouTubers, like Spazzy, who's still relatively big YouTuber, Civ HD, and for some reason I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give commentating a go. Now, I did try it once back in the day for Counter Strike Source, and I was terrible. I had no idea what to say. I really had no idea what to do back then, and I just gave it a go. I did a little fun practice cast with them, and it turned out okay. It turned out all right. I think that video is actually still up on my old YouTube channel. And from there, like I got I think I got contacted by Monte Cristo for a tournament he was putting on. It was like the GG Chronicle League of Legends tournament. And he's like, "Hey, would you be interested in like casting a couple of games?" Like, "Yeah, sure." So we got together, like a good amount of people, and I gave it a go, and it didn't turn out that bad. And where it really kicked off now was the fact that Joe Miller at the time, I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. He put out a tweet asking, "Do any of you guys have any new and up and coming commentators like that you enjoy? If you do, like send a link my way and I'll check it out." And apparently, someone sent him one of my commentary videos I did, which again was just kind of for fun. And he forwarded over to his boss. You probably actually know who I'm talking about if I said his name, but I'm going to keep it private for now. And he contacted me. And to be honest, I'm like, look at this email. And it's like, "Hey, we saw your videos and we're interested in, bringing you to Germany to become a full-time commentator." And I thought it was absolute bullshit. I was like, what? Who just reaches out to someone randomly like, "Hey, you want a job in Germany?" But I was contacted by them, and I was talking to IPL at the same time in San Francisco, which is unfortunately like a dead company now. If you guys know Nick Allen, he was a big part of it as well. About potentially like working for them, and unfortunately at the time, like they didn't have any openings, and they were having some struggles. So I was like, you know what, Germany, I can do it. I can move halfway across the world from California to Germany and make something work. And kind of the rest is history from there. Like, just it's so weird. I feel like most people out there can kind of trace back their like start to one thing. For me, the breakup, or if you want to go further back to not having as solid a relationship with my siblings as my brother and sister did, that like ignited the whole esports career for myself.
That's amazing. That's a really cool story. I mean, it's awesome that you like it's such like a defined point. I mean, a
Mm,
lot of people can do that, but then there's also like I feel like it's half that and then half just kind of like, yeah, I just kind of like fell into it before I knew it. I was casting like bigger things.
yep.
But like for you, you're I mean, you're one of the first guests on my podcast that is coming like from the very beginnings of League of Legends, which has obviously become one of the biggest esports. As far as where it is now, might not be as important for this particular subject as it is that it's fascinating to hear that you were there towards more of the beginning of League of Legends, which ended up really pushing esports to a new level and kind of leading the charge on the whole idea of like imbuing the game with the esport,
Hmm.
which is something that StarCraft, which came up before and did start the revolution of esports, 2010, couldn't push through, and there was that very famous talk show with Destiny and In Control and all them that like he was pointing out all these things and they were like, "Now don't worry about it." And time has been unfavorable to the non-Destiny guests of that show, but it's fascinating to hear. So you were there kind of at the groundworks. You're talking about all these people who are now, not just super famous commentators, but even moved on into the behind the scenes roles. They've become influential in broadcasts as well as just general esports management. So that's an amazing story. So, but you were there at the beginning. So what
Yeah.
year was it when you were contacted to go to Germany exactly?
2012. I think it was somewhere around like April or March. Maybe I got contacted about it, and they had to work out like some finer things of whether or not I could move. And then I actually did move to Germany in July of 2012. And that was before LCS began. That was like during the like what IEM season. I want to say like 6 or 7 and something, like really early on, when they still had like StarCraft, League of Legends, and Counter Strike wasn't really even a thing anymore for them.
Hmm. Yeah, there was that awkward period where I mean, you mentioned that you commentated Source, which I kind of chuckled at just because like Source is a
What?
forgotten middle child.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It really is.
But that was what's happening, and that's why. So for people who don't know the history of esports, and a lot of people don't. It feels like a lot of people got in kind of around 2015 for a lot of StarCraft people, but I think
That's
in
fair.
general, really, it's felt when it really hit another level around that year. But anyway, so you had StarCraft 2 come out. It worked alongside Justin TV turns into Twitch, really ushers in this new age of esports. League of Legends is coming in as the new kid. They're now suddenly like everyone eyes are on them. Like, can they do it? Can they continue pushing forward? And then Counter Strike was actually nothing for a while because Source was, I guess, universally considered as unideal, mediocre,
Hated,
whatever you want.
hated.
And then even when Go came out, it wasn't good either. So it took a little while for CS to
Yeah,
really come into its own.
I think that's completely fair actually, because so I actually casted Counter Strike or CS:GO like very in the very early days. I think I have some like casts up in 2012, 2013. I think more so 2013, where I was casting like an ESL Meisterschaft, which is like a German championship with like Joe Miller and with Red Eye actually, like way back in the day before your Anderson Semlers, before well, I'd say alongside your Anderson Semlers, not before, but before your Henry G's, your Sadakis, your Sponge and Machines. It
Mm.
was kind of like us five ish, maybe six if you want to include Pansy in that one as well, but she got hired later on, and then it just blew up quite big, which is nice.
Yeah. So not to get too far ahead of ourselves though, but that was a timeline of I guess some of the biggest esports, and
Hmm.
League of Legends is currently the biggest. Counter Strike's right behind them, and then I guess there's Dota. But so you're there in 2012. You're one of those special cases in esports that does exist for a lot of people, where they're like, I got reached out to after having a very limited amount of time, and they're like, we need bodies, come over here, and you were in a perfect time and place to say yes. So that was during the 6 months that your parents gave you, or was that a little
Yeah.
bit longer than that? Okay.
So I think it was I can't remember the exact dates to be honest, but I think it was around the 6 month period. I think like obviously I said like I needed to show them I can make money from YouTube, and they didn't really believe me at first. And then I started to like, rake in $100 here, a couple $100 there, and they started to believe it. And then this kind of opportunity came up, and I felt like maybe my heart wasn't into making like YouTube content consistently. Like I don't think I was creative enough or good enough with like Photoshop and video editing tools to do anything like that. So I just decided to make the leap into it.
And that was a full-time gig? Like how many days were you working? Was it
Yeah.
only League of Legends?
So that's I got hired on the basis that I would only do League of Legends. I wanted to like confirm that with them because I wasn't sure about other games. I wasn't sure about commentating in general because I didn't know how I would be able to do at it. So initially it was like okay, League of Legends, and it was like a normal normal job. Well, as normal as you can be in esports, where it'd be like Monday through Friday, weekends off. But obviously, if you have show days, then your weekend would change a little bit. So it was pretty standard. We covered a lot of things like Meister shafts. We covered like IM qualifiers into IM events. The first event I ever did was actually Gamescom in 2012. And if you're unfamiliar with what Gamescom is, it's this big esports, not esports, this big gaming convention that happens out here in Cologne. I think one of the biggest in the world, if I'm not mistaken, that sees the likes of 200 to 400,000 people a day or throughout the entire event show up. So it's insane. But that it was kind of like a normal-ish job, I guess you could say, with a steep learning curve in the beginning.
So when you came in, did you feel like you were a commentator because you were so new to the field, or
Hell no. Are you kidding me? I came in there. I have pictures of me with my how I dressed and my hair and really having no clue. And I mean, at the time, I actually before I got hired, I didn't really know who Joe was. But the more and more that I like started to look into the actual job, I realized that he was like a pretty big commentator, and it was a pretty big deal to be like his partner at the time. So I was kind of like shitting my pants like in the first cast, honestly, because I didn't know what to do. Like again, it's like you're imagine a job you've never had before that you like tried once, and then you're like, okay, this is your full-time job now. Sit down and talk about this game for 6, 7, 8 hours a night. It was daunting as hell.
so did you start trying to practice commentary? Did you focus on just learning the game? I mean, what did you try to do? What was a goal to be the best commentator, or were you just trying to get your feet underneath you? Like, what was your process kind of during that beginning time?
It was definitely focused on keeping my head above water, I'd say. I think that's kind of the story of esports is you either sink or swim. And at the time, I was just trying to breathe as much as I possibly could. I was already decent at the game. Like I, for a long time, was the highest rated commentator in League of Legends in Europe. Generally, in every game I play or every game I cast, I'm generally like one of like the higher ranked ones because I like to really know the ins and outs of the game. So back then, I think my focus wasn't necessarily on the game because I already knew the game, as a base. Like I played at a decent level. It was more of like breaking out of my shell. I've always been a really shy person, especially when I was younger. And then all of a sudden, like, I think everyone out there, even if you are shy, you have that one topic you could discuss with someone and you just completely can talk like as if you've never were shy to begin with. And it was more about like transitioning out of my shell and being able to talk, but also like learning the finer things of how to properly do commentary and more importantly, like how to properly be on camera. Like I had no clue like where to look. If I had to do production, I had to like learn how to make the graphics in a break screen and throw up the right scenes and stuff like that. So I think my focus wasn't really on my like quality of casting. It was more about just slowly getting into what I'm supposed to be doing and like learning from, day in, day out kind of thing.
And did your peers ever, reach out to help you? Was there some criticism?
Phew. Yeah. I think that's a really tough topic actually. Because I
Mm,
don't want to like throw anyone under the boat or anything like that, I don't want to like I feel like and maybe even till this day, I think commentary, most people are very, very protective of it. For instance, if I'm a commentator in game X, right, and there's this commentator coming into this game, it doesn't necessarily benefit me to help that commentator who potentially could take my job down the line. If you were to look at it that way, right? There's obviously many ways you can look at it. So I feel like I could have had definitely more help in the beginning in terms of it, but at the same time, I think it really forced me to rely on myself, which was also nice because I mean, this is my first time living not at my parents' place, like to live on my own in another country, doing a job I've never done before, experience all this that I've never had in my life. So it taught me to rely on myself and to kind of like focus on myself a bit. But I definitely feel like early on it was a little bit rough learning what to do because I don't know, like, because I don't want it to sound like Joe wasn't helpful in any way. It was more of like, I wish I had someone that I could sit there and talk to and like work through the whole processes behind like how to properly commentate. But
mm.
but at the same time, there were things that Joe taught me that I even keep within my commentary till this day. Like for instance, one of them being I'm not the star of the show. The players are the star of the show. If I'm doing an interview with someone, I'm not the star. It's all about telling their story and making them the priority when it comes to a show, which sadly these days has actually changed quite a bit, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting topic we can get
Oh,
into
yeah.
a little while later. But kind of on the topic of mentors, it's something that I've thought about. Where just like when we talk about traditional sports, you can actually look to a ton of people as mentors. They've written books, they've done series. Some of them probably even have classes, probably right that you can look to. But when it came to esports, especially back in 2012, everyone was probably feeling, even if they were more secure, everyone was probably feeling like they were either sinking or swimming, right? Like they were all trying to keep their head above water.
I think there was a lot of people still learning themselves at
Yeah,
the time.
exactly.
Like I think maybe like for instance, Red Eye, Joe, Demon. I think if you look back to like Quad TV, those are some of the few like even Tosspot in there that like kind of already had years and years of experience. So they kind of generally knew what they were doing. But then you look at the likes of Quickshot, who was on LCS with me back in the day. Like him and I were kind of in the same sense of like what are we doing, like what do we do to get better, we didn't really have that kind of groundwork under us yet, but there were
Yeah.
a select few, but it definitely is not like it is today.
Right, exactly. And even today, I mean, it still is hard to compare, right? All the people who are pushing this industry forward are also still in the process of kind of learning themselves, right? We don't look upon a 60, 70-year-old guy who's retired and be like, yep, that was the golden standard. There you
Artosis and
go.
Tasteless are quite up there.
They're getting there.
Yeah.
Soon they'll be the golden standard of retirees. But yeah, it is so different, because sometimes it is really hard to find that mentor who even feels like they're in a capacity to mentor someone, right? Like, yeah, there's definitely a case of I'm sure some people being a little bit guarded about, like I don't want you taking my job, bro. But
Yeah.
there's also just that criticism in general is very hard to give and receive. Kind of
Yes.
that's a whole problem that exists. Like you could be working with someone and even told like you're going to work with this person for 6 months, and if they're interrupting you or they clearly don't know the game or something, it can still be very hard to broach that subject and be like, look, dude, like come on, let's work together, right? So I think that's still a difficulty in any year of esports, any role of esports, is to actually have those conversations.
It's something that kind of transcends even commentary. It's that mental realization of like this is your job and you need to act professional. So like for instance in esports right now for like teams, I think there's a lot of like players who pick up friends to be on their teams rather than someone that works well for the team. I feel like people, I mean, there's a level of camaraderie that I understand when you look at esports and sports, comparing teams. But I think in sports, people see it more of a profession or see it more of a profession. Even if they have beef with someone or they don't like someone that's on their team, they're still going to perform to the best of their ability, and so is the other one. At least
Mhm.
that's what I hope. But I feel like in esports, it's more friendships. I think like one of my best duos that I've had was Mitch Leslie, who works on Overwatch League. And is starting to do some Valorant and stuff like that. And I think Brawl Stars at the moment, him and I were just like really good friends. So it's really easy to give feedback to each other. Like we would go to the gym together, play games together. We would go do a show together. But I think it's on that note of like giving feedback. If it's someone that you're not really good friends with, I think they get really their guard comes up really quickly, and they're like, "Oh, I think you're wrong." And if you criticize me, I'm going to criticize you. I think it's like what you're saying. It's really hard to give feedback to anyone properly. But I will say, like the newer people that are coming into esports these days seem to be a lot more open to it.
It does seem to be that way, right? It might be a little more of that whole like everyone is a pioneer. It was the wild, wild west back in the day, so everyone felt like they were going to be the one to kind of like push, what it should be. Maybe there was a little bit of that, and now it is like you'll like, oh my goodness, I was watching Valorant and there was like two literally 16-year-old guys casting, and I was like, they're really good and they're super young.
Yeah,
And for them, they can look at people who are 35 and be like, wow, that person is clearly my senior who I can get amazing feedback from. Let's go. Whereas, yeah, maybe back 8 years, 9 years ago, it was a little more like, well, I mean, you may be older than me, but like you worked in esports for much longer than me. Like, no, not really.
I
So
mean a
I
good
think it has.
example. Sorry to cut you
Go
off. A good
ahead.
example of that actually is like PUBG Mobile that I'm doing. There's this one guy who used to watch me from my LCS days in 2012, 2013. And I mean, he has that level of respect for me because he's like, yeah, you've been doing this a long time. I used to watch you when I was younger. And I think if you look at those 16-year-olds who are casting Valorant, I think they've watched and grown up on,
Hmm.
the current commentators that we have, and they learn from them, and they're willing to, listen to them because, hey, they've been in the business 8 years.
Yeah. I think there's a lot less of like, instead of coming up kind of around the same time and feeling that you're both kind of figuring things out, there is a lot more of that set in stone. Like I've watched you, because I think it's different if like, as someone who watched, easy example, day nine, I think a lot of people watched day nine when StarCraft first came out, and they'd immediately take feedback from Dan, especially because he's such a nice guy. You'd figure that he'd be
Oh
one of the
yeah.
nicest guys to get feedback from. But maybe people who came up with him were, obviously seeing him more as a peer, and they're like, I don't know if your way is really the best way. That whole discussion makes sense. But I think for general and feedback, what we've learned here over talking to many people is that if you can focus on bettering the broadcast as like a team, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where you really can start to communicate well. There's a common goal, as opposed to just feeling like you're attacked, which is really important and does get a lot easier when you're friends with someone,
Hmm.
because usually your friendship also is around this collective passion of not just a game but also of commentary. So I mean, sometimes people will definitely poo poo on the idea of bringing friends in, and they should, because sometimes it's a bad idea. Sometimes your friend isn't good, they're not good for the broadcast, whatever, whatever. But since commentary is so much about chemistry, right, and having this open line of communication, it is, I would say, a lot of the times going to be absolutely crucial to befriending these people and
Yeah.
actually having conversations with them.
I want to say really quickly as a tidbit, day nine was the only person I ever got starstruck from meeting back at Gamescom in 2012 when I got to go to the StarCraft area and like introduce myself. But yeah, so on that note, I feel like if you look at sports commentary versus esports commentary, there's a complete difference where there's I think an entirely different entertainment level expected when it comes to esports, and I feel like that's kind of changed over time. It's gotten more and more dependent on being entertaining. Whereas back in the day, you would just want to like obviously commentate on what's happening. People want to see the teams, want to see the players do well. But I feel like now it's kind of transitioned to the point of you want these you want to watch for the commentators sometimes, and you're watching for the entertainment, the jokes they make, the like the interpersonal jokes they make between each other and stuff like that, and the how well they work off each other more so than just two people casting side by side to just bring you the game, which is it's kind of frustrating. I feel like because I think back when I started, it was again like I said before, like when it comes to interviews, it's more about the player, but now it's becoming more about your own brand that you're bringing to it. Like the way Artasis and Artosis like have these really good jokes and the way they deal with downtime. It's more about your individual brand more so than I feel like sometimes your actual commentary skills. And that's not to knock on Taste of Artosis at all. It's more to knock on the companies who are bringing in influencers to do commentary now when they never were a commentator to begin with and don't actually know how to be a proper commentator.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the most fascinating, like complex subjects that we can discuss here. It's that, this idea of branding being far more important than the actual skill.
Yes.
Ideally skill will eventually show itself, but it's going to take a lot longer. You make a funny video, it gets really popular, you get a gig. That seems to be the quickest path to some type of success. You just try and hone in on your skills, talk clearer, have a wider vocabulary, know the game more.
Hmm.
It's going to take a lot of gigs before people are like, wait a second, they actually know what they're talking about, or what have you. So, on that subject, did you figure this part along, years back when you were doing League of Legends, where you're like, okay, I need to start branding myself, or did you focus entirely on the craft and improving it?
I think I went with the way the old guard approached it, of the craft more so around it than my own personal brand. I actually, so the most of the feedback I've gotten, even like dating to, let's just say like late last year, was that my brand is probably one of the weakest things I have. I don't have really anything unique about my style or my personality that you can just like listen to, be like, okay, that's Jason or something. Because I've never was really brought up in the commentary mind of like it being about me, you know? So I never really focused on having my own brand and having my own unique style compared to anyone else. It's always been about people just listen to me to like keep engaged with the game. They care about the players more than me, which is totally fine. I'd rather be selfless in that sense of making the players look better because that's how I was taught. So I feel like I actually kind of like hamstrung myself by focused on that more than branding. So because I can think of one event in particular, BlizzCon 2016. I was picked up to do interviews. And in typical style, I started with doing interviews, like I said before. The way I was taught about doing interviews is to talk about the player, make them shine, not yourself. And as I'm doing the interview, or when I was done with some of the interviews, the feedback I got from Blizzard was, yeah, you're just not memorable enough on camera. And I'm like, what? Like, that's literally my job, is to make people listen to the player, make them shine, and not make me stand out at all, because it's about the players. We're making stars out of them. And that was the feedback I got. And I was like, that's fucked up, in my opinion, because I feel like I nailed my job there, but they're not happy because I didn't stand out enough, which to me, it makes no sense. But with the way esports is going, I can understand it now, of like, that's what you should be doing more so of, but it's just not how I was taught, or really what I believe in, what's done right, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
It does make a lot of sense, but it is like really it's a quandary. I don't know even where to begin here. Is it's one of the first times I feel like I've heard this. Of course, I've talked to people about branding, and they're like, "Yeah, it's probably a good thing if you have like a particular brand." And I think it's easier when you are known for a particular thing. But to have a example right then and there, literally direct feedback, which is quite harsh. You're not
Yeah,
memorable. Is something to say
yeah.
to someone. Yeah, that's fascinating in a I'm looking from the outside kind of thing, right? Um, it's probably not fascinating for you, but
Not at the
we
moment, I
yeah,
guess.
not at the moment, yeah. But so I guess let me pick your brain and your thoughts on this subject. So you kind of learned this a little more recently than some other things. Have you then adapted to the esports style? Or are you is it the equivalent of a YouTuber finally putting reaction faces on their thumbnails? Like they just have to kind of like
Oh no.
dig into it, right? Or do you think that there is still like a pathway for the stalwart, I'm going to just increase my skill? Is that still something that you think is working out for you?
Hmm. So I'm tempted to talk about something that I haven't made like super public, but it's been kind of known. Like I feel like, so I did League of Legends into Counter Strike into Overwatch, with a lot of like smaller games in between. And I told myself after Overwatch I'd be done commentating, because I've been in a major League of Legends esport and didn't exceed past the first year, but that's a little bit more complicated. CS:GO, I didn't get to where I wanted to be, but that's a topic I can't fully go into necessarily. And then Overwatch, I think I got completely fucked over by Blizzard when it came to that in particular. So I told myself I wasn't going to do it anymore. Like I was going to be done if Overwatch doesn't work out. Then I ended up finding like another game after that I wanted to stick around with, and I've been kind of just enjoying, I guess, taking the experience that I've learned and applying it to other people. I feel like actually my commentary career is probably close to over.
Hmm.
I think there's a massive shelf life. Like there's an obvious shelf life when it comes to commentary. Like one good example, I guess, is you look at your Joe Millers or your Demons. Joe Miller, he got out at a relatively good time when he was at his peak, and he like transitioned to being more talent management. Demon, he had his peak in League of Legends. CS didn't work out well for him. Overwatch didn't work out well for him, and now he's kind of not been able to hit back to that like tier or AAA esport and be one of the top commentators that he used to be. So in my mind, I've already like started transition away from being a commentator and more behind the scenes because I feel like my run's getting close to being done, which kind of
Hmm.
fits perfectly well with what I'm doing right now because I'm working a lot in PUBG Mobile and I'm actually been hired to be like a talent lead for PUBG Mobile through the company. So I'm basically taking my experience that I've had as a commentator and like applying it to everyone else, helping all the other talent improve and helping facilitate a lot of the problems, or I guess alleviate a lot of the problems that we used to have as talent so they don't happen anymore for other people. So I think most commentators are gonna have to like look at that of when do I get out of it? And maybe the branding didn't work out too well for me, which again, I'm not really like, really sad on necessarily. I feel like I'm not that type of person to be egotistical and want everything to be about me. But I think I've realized like my time's up soon. And I
Hmm.
think I provide a niche that a lot of people can't have of I've been in front of the camera for such a long time. I was there since the beginning. Like I've seen how the scene's grown. I've learned a lot of tricks and then I can take all that knowledge, put it in behind the scene that not many people can offer up at the moment.
Absolutely true. I think the world of caster esports on air like education, I guess let's use that umbrella term, is it's like time to invest. It's like the stonks will go up very soon
Yeah.
as more people get into it. Esports gets bigger, more young people get into it, right? More people are going to need guidance. Like it's definitely something that's interesting. I know Gillyweed, I don't know if it's
Hmm.
exactly the same boat, right? But she did Heroes, and then well, Heroes just yeah, that happened with Heroes. Then she did Rocket League, and she was really loved in Rocket League too. But then she decided that at some point she wanted to move on and started working with Psionics as more of that kind of bridge between the talent and the production, kind of giving talent management, player management, talent coach, like the whole
Yeah.
bundle of hats you have to wear to be in esports. And I thought she would, I obviously think she was great at it. Now she's working with a different company, but yeah, it sounds like something that's going to be incredibly useful, and that's someone who has years and years of experience and who's thought critically on these things as well. And you're the type of guy that I enjoy talking to the most on these podcasts, honestly, because I think you gotta look very critically on this. Are going to be able to communicate, and you've also kind of done it sometimes the hard way as well, right? Like admitting like, yeah, it kind of sucked that I couldn't do this or that, but you've learned through it. And I feel like it actually makes the best teachers as well. I feel like I'm just sitting here being like, yeah, go for it. That sounds amazing. I don't mean to tell you to stop commentating, but I'm excited for it because I feel like the teachers out there who are the best teachers often did it through like, they learned through some great pains. They learned where they accept their own faults and
Hmm.
drawbacks. And now they can kind of push other people this way or the other because of it. I'm one of the most interesting things I think to come in the next few years is what you're talking about. Is I guess
Yeah.
what I'm
It's,
conveying here.
I mean, you look at, I mean, just because of StarCraft background, Tasteless and Artosis, we've seen what's happened with StarCraft too, unfortunately, or even Brood War. We've seen, unfortunately, the steady decline of support from Blizzard and support, I guess, over in Korea now, with things starting to be shut down. And then they're forced to move into another game. And now I know they have a massive brand behind them, but are they going to be as well received in Valorant or PUBG that they're doing now as they were in StarCraft? And I think there will be some viewers that carry over because they just love them so much. But I don't know if they're necessarily be as big as some of the other people who have been doing specifically that genre for a lot longer, or have kind of spread themselves thin across, or not thin, but spread themselves out across multiple esports. Monte Cristo and Doa, they were massive in League of Legends in Korea. They transitioned over to Overwatch after everything that happened with Riot, and I don't feel like they ever hit that same kind of stride of being like the number one duo. I
Mm.
think there was other people that excelled over them, unfortunately. And again, it's not a knock on their skill or anything like that, but I think that's maybe the downside of like pigeonholing yourself into one game and one game only. And it's unfortunate, but I feel like the older we all get, I'm 32, I'm not young. Artosis has kids. You look at Anders, he has kids as well. I think the freelance life, albeit kind of maybe glorified in terms of like if you get a gig every month or multiple gigs in a row, you're always, around the world, pre-COVID times, and you're making pretty damn good money, I'll be honest. But I don't want to have to depend on getting kind of lucky and getting a gig, for next month to be able to support a family or to support kids or to buy a house or something. So I feel like the older our generation of esports personalities get, the more likely and more often you're going to see them going behind the scenes, behind the camera for a full-time job, so they have that steady income. Because that's one of the most nerve-wracking things about being freelance, is just never knowing when your next gig is, never knowing, if that TO is going to pay you on time, or or if that game is going to continue to want to use you, because the publishers might change their mind, they might find someone new. It's a very like you're always in this like state of like fear, I guess. Maybe not like obviously like it's a horror movie, but you're always that wonder in your head, and your brain just really gets to you. And I think over time people are like, you know what, fuck this. I don't want to have to worry about any of this stuff. I'll take a lower income job, but if it means I can depend on having that job for years and depend on putting food on the table for kids or something like that, then I think you will transition. And also the pressure of the 16-year-olds you mentioned who are coming up in the scene, the newer generation who listen to your commentary, who even studied about broadcasting skills. They're going to be better than you, period. It's going to happen, like technicality wise, knowing how to brand themselves better on social media and making content. I think there is a time, not time bomb, but there is an end to most people's careers nowadays in terms of being in front of a camera.
And the sucky thing is that sometimes it's not a point where we'd want to accept it, but it's still a point where we have to. And then that's always the scary thing. You brought it up. Like, I think just the constant anxiousness you have in your mind being in this industry is because you constantly have to think about reinventing yourself. You can never just kind of like be chill in a solid work for a year at least. Like, no, you have to constantly think about what's coming next, even in a relatively safe esport such as CS:GO, because not only could the TOs just be like, no, I don't like you anymore, or the publishers or what have you, the game itself could no longer be something viable for working in, which is just not something you hear about in like any other industry, really. Like,
I want to jump in on that actually about CS, because there's been some times, I don't know if everyone out there follows CS as close as they do other esports, but I think when you are freelance and you are one of like the AAA commentators for that title, like one of the best duos, you have this this lingering fear that if you miss an event, then you might like fuck over your career. I can think to like Anders and Semmler in particular, I guess, or just to name like a popular duo, to take every gig they possibly get offered, which means, you're gone for months at a time from being home, because they don't want to and this isn't necessarily like to knock them, by the way. I think it's perfectly understandable, but you don't want to miss an event or not do an event to either A, lose out on the opportunity of the TO rehiring you, or B, letting another duo who normally wouldn't have that opportunity because they want you to get in there and potentially take any gigs away. I look at Harry and Hugo right now, and they've been on, they're CS commentators over in England. They've been on such a massive grind for 3-4 years, if not longer than that, in CS. And only recently, after grinding that entire time, they've been able to break through due to some conflicts with like other commentators not wanting to do a certain gig, or the rates not aligning properly. And then they got their breakout moment. And then the TO's like, okay, you're great, we want to keep using you. And that's also like a massive fear when it comes to talent of like, if I say no to an event, will I lose all that potential income down the line? Will I lose my job down the line? It's tough.
There's no place that's really safe. I think it's an important thing to think of. We sometimes can look at people who seem to be very solid on top of the food chain in a particular game and be like, oh, well, maybe they don't have to worry as much. But that's not really true. They're constantly still worrying about losing that top spot, and then, being forced to reduce their pay, which they've worked for years to make a living, livable salary. So, and then, there's the conflict of they don't want to be brought down, is not the right phrase, but they don't want to, decrease their rates. But then these other guys who are putting in the hours, putting in the grind, obviously either they want to get to the top of the pyramid. And that's another thing that a lot of people get stuck on in esports is that they think like because these guys who are doing this for so long and who keep on taking all the jobs and are at the top of the pyramid keep doing it, I feel like I'm capped out and I'm not even doing that much. I'm not even like doing that many premiere gigs or whatever. And
That's
that's a
a
frustrating feeling.
that's a completely like different topic as well. You look at hmm, maybe StarCraft, because I want to ask you about this. It'd be like the easiest way to go about it. The guard doesn't seem to change too often in terms of like the commentary or the commentators, right? I feel like you
Mm,
generally would see, at least I guess when it's more of like circuit events of having like consistent IEMs happening, dream hacks happening, you would see like the same commentators over and over and over again. And there wouldn't be many opportunities for anyone to really break out, which is a completely whole another thing of like, how do you ever break out in esports? How do you, make yourself unique compared to everyone else? But at some point you have to ask yourself, am I just bashing my head against a wall and I'm never going to break through? Do I need to switch to another game? Because I think there's commentators of passion who like see one game and they're like, okay, that's the only game I ever want to work on. I love this game so much, I never want to change away from it. And then there's commentators for profession who just want to commentate, like they want to make this their living and they're willing to switch games and stuff like that. And I think when you're one of those people who's like stuck under this glass ceiling that you can't seem to break through, you have to ask yourself, do I keep trying in this game or do I look at other games? Do I try to make this a career or is it just a passion for me? Which, again, I'm not trying to knock the passion at all. I think those are probably some of the best people you can work with, actually, because they always want to strive to make the product better. But sometimes, like, you're not really going to break through that glass ceiling ever. And you have to make that hard decision, like I made in League of Legends. I mean, when I didn't get rehired by Riot, which is, oh, that's a topic I mean, I probably could talk about, but I don't know if I can still get in trouble for that anymore. I had to ask myself, like, without LCS, what would I be doing? Like, should I just quit commentating? Should I move to another game? And luckily, working at ESL at the time, I had the opportunity to try other games, right? And I don't think necessarily everyone has that opportunity, because then you're like, even if you get into like the middle of the pack, like, the middle of the pyramid when it comes to like the casting food chain, you move to another game. If you haven't built up enough brand or recognizability, English is hard.
recognition.
Yeah, recognition. Thank you. Then you fall off that pyramid. You fall back down, and then it's a big grind again to get back up the pyramid. I think there's been some people who can transition really easily across multiple esports and be fine, but it's that grind that makes it even harder. Of
Hmm.
what's your goal in esports? Do you want to be seen as a top of the tier caster duo? Are you okay just doing it for a living and making money, per month? It's frustrating as hell.
Yeah. I think you put it in a very like good succinct way that I haven't heard yet, but there's the commentators of passion, the commentators of like the business professional side. I think it's a brilliant way to put it. Something that I've been struggling with. So you're, speaking to my heart right now. Because StarCraft, there's only so many spots. We don't even bring that many commentators to our events when we have events during the not COVID years. It's 5 per event with maybe like 6 events, like 6 to 10, I suppose, like 5 main ones, some random ones, right? That even as me, I'm in the middle there. Roddy's kind of being invited to everything, so he's kind
Right.
of upward. But then there was, I should say, kind of at this point, it's not necessarily the case anymore, but there was that ceiling of like, well, Tastosis will never be beaten. Their branding's too powerful, their chemistry's too powerful. They're
They're a
very good at what
freaking
they do.
walking archon.
Yeah, exactly. Like what are you gonna do against that, right? Like and even if you tried to emulate what they're doing, try to be like, if I was like, hey Maynard, let's be at Archon together, we could never be in studio together. He lives in Australia, I live in America. We could never do a consistent gig because that doesn't exist in StarCraft. Unlike them,
Yeah.
so many reasons why you can't do what these people above you are doing. So at some point you ask yourself like, well, do I want to keep putting my head against this wall over and over again, or can I find out what I like about this? And as you were saying, if I was someone who was like, what, StarCraft's the only thing I ever enjoyed, I'm a dead person everywhere else, then I feel like I'd be a little screwed, and that would suck. But it's something that is actually happened. I've actually identified that personally. I was like, yeah, I'm a little screwed in that department. Like, not, I'm happy with where I am. I'm glad I could improve. I'm glad I have the community that I do, but I am a little stuck. There's not much
Yeah.
more to grow in StarCraft, especially since we might have our own clock ticking down with the 3-year contract coming up in 2023. So what else is there to do? So exactly what you said, I started to question myself. Do I like commentating StarCraft or do I like commentating?
Yeah.
And I am currently on that journey right now. I'll let you know how it goes in a year
Well,
plus.
I mean, you do have a major upside. I feel like in your case in particular, is it StarCraft or is it RTS? I think that's a question you have to ask yourself, right? Do you like
Yeah.
the real time strategy, or do you like StarCraft because of the lore behind it, because of the units, because of how you grew up? But then you have, what was it, Frostbite? I'm so sorry if I get
Frost
the name
Giant.
wrong. Frost Giant, thank you. I mean, they're probably developing an RTS, or they
Hmm.
are. I mean, they should be developing an RTS. And then you ask yourself, okay, is it the commentary side that I really appreciate of it, or do I feel like I can maybe offer more to this game and this genre that I care so deeply about that I can help it excel behind the camera? And I'm just talking about you in particular because we're talking about that. But that's a question I think a lot of talent will ask themselves down the line as well. Is like, can you help the genre succeed by then help, like being a consultant for the game, consultant for the company, or maybe you can go into the esports side of it. I think that's one of my goals actually. Is I think I recognized early on that casting is not going to work forever. I want to work in the esports department for a publisher in some aspect. Maybe that's a future for I guess you in particular. It's a question and a lot of questions that I think every talent out there should be asking themselves.
It's a question you have to, again, even if you're not willing to accept it. If I, you brought up another good point, which is genre specific stuff. There's a lot of people who can adapt quicker, seemingly anyways, between Apex to Valorant to CS:GO to
Hmm.
PUBG, shooters being the general, and then battle royales and whatnot below that genre. But anyways, like that seems to be something that's I'm envious of. I watch people go from CS:GO to Valorant because that's pretty obvious there. But then even include PUBG, and I'm like, well, that makes sense, and I guess I could do that too if I wanted to get into Age of Empires, which by the way, I do not. I figured I did not like that game. Found that out
Aw,
fairly
sick game.
recently. Oh, I love playing it casually, but yeah. Anyways, but yeah, that's another issue. Is like, are you a genre commentator or are you a general commentator? What role do you enjoy? It's another thing that you can transition to. Because my point in bringing this up was that you have to ask yourself these questions, and then you have to try and be very honest with yourself if you're if
Hmm.
you're maxed out on where you are in particular. That doesn't mean that you can't do something else very closely related. If you can go from being an analyst to a host, suddenly you might have a couple more opportunities, right? But then if
Yep.
you need to get off air, if that's no longer working for you, just being on camera just isn't even leading anywhere, then you're bringing up all these amazing other ideas that's only going to grow in the market as well. And the idea of like esports consultation is going to grow. It already is a market and it's full of a bunch of people who don't know what they're talking about. But then the people who are experienced and do have the proper resumes are going to come in as well. And that's
Yeah.
going to be a whole other field that's still very closely related to esports. And I would absolutely love that.
You remember how I said earlier when ESL approached me, I like made sure, okay, I only want to do League of Legends. I am so grateful and happy that I didn't stick to that when I did move to Germany, that I did spread myself out because I started as a color caster for League of Legends, who could do a little bit of play by play. Carmack even like messaged me, which gave me, I think, a lot of oh, help me. English is so hard. It gave me a lot of
Pride.
uh
Hope.
confidence, maybe.
Oh, okay.
It gave me confidence that like maybe this is something I can do, like a more play by play esque. And then I kind of realized if I want to spread out and do multiple games, which I think honestly most casters should do in some sense, because I think it rounds you out as a commentator overall. I've learned things in MOBAs that I implement into my casting of FPSs, that I implement into casting of battle royales. I've even casted StarCraft once, and I think sounded okay, I guess. But because I did that, because I experienced like more play-by-play roles, because I learned how to host in terms of being play-by-play, like hosting the duo and stuff like that, I've actually like rounded myself out in general that technically I can go do analyst work if I wanted for another game. I could go do hosting. I mean, I'm doing CS hosting, even though I was a CS commentator initially. I'm doing PUBG Mobile hosting, even though before that I really never hosted before. I think you just kind of get this nice little skill set built around you, and I think, and I hope for a lot of like the new commentators out there that they're willing to try other roles just to kind of round themselves out and just get that experience. Because again, the experience that I gained from doing all of that, I can then turn into a job behind the scenes later on because of what I've gained and learned over time.
I like what you're saying. Absolutely. Everything that I've tried doing, I feel like it's helped me at my core, which is still pretty much an analyst for StarCraft. But I've really worked on the play-by-play. I've tried the hosting thing. I've done the interviews. I've just tried to be eager. Whenever
Hmm.
someone's like, "Can you do a thing?" and I'm like, "Holy crap, I don't know if I can." Instead of saying that out loud, I go, "Yep, let's do it. Let's have some fun." And then I try my best, right?
You keep trying to learn, which is
Yeah,
important
exactly.
in any job and anything in life. It's important to always be trying to keep learning.
Yep. Yeah. And usually if you approach something with gusto, at least you come off as genuine,
Yep.
excited. So it's not the worst thing that can happen. So we talked a lot about kind of like the general like theory crafting of esports and I guess retiring from the on camera stuff. But we also talked a lot about the specific skills and how you worked on them. So let's focus in on that. So you've had so many jobs now through many games, many positions, and you've watched other people come and go, rise to the top, have to retire. So, what are some of the big things that you've learned when it comes to commentating specifically? Let's start with that. That you think make a good commentator.
Hmm. Things I've learned. I'd say firstly, it's really hard to do anything by yourself. I'd say one of like the easiest ways to help yourself learn and to help yourself succeed when it comes to commentating esports is to find someone who's very like-minded like you and that you can work with consistently to grow together. Because that person you can rely on to push you to want to be better, to help give you feedback to be better, and to obviously be able to sell yourself as a duo down the line. If you do go at it individually, I think it's important to get used to the sound of your own voice and watching your own VODs back. Even though after almost 9 years in now, I still hate listening to my own broadcasts, my own hosting, and I hate hearing myself making mistakes. But it's something you have to get used to if you want to improve. The self reflection period is very important. Um, and then, hmm, I'd say obviously working on your brand, especially nowadays, is important. Like creating YouTube content, creating like podcasts like this, creating breaking down plays if you're more analytical when it comes to like other tournaments and stuff like that. We see so much content, but I'd also say it's important to try to find something unique that you can do. I feel like that's honestly, if I didn't think of something unique back in the day, I don't think I would have did anything better than something that someone else was already doing. So finding a unique approach is very important. And then also, I think one of the biggest things is that when you do get somewhat established, is don't burn bridges. I think it's really easy at esports because of, especially like back in the day, we didn't fully know what we were doing. We were kind of immature and didn't understand like, what our words would eventually do to us down the line. It can come back to haunt you. Anything that you might say that pisses one publisher off could potentially be passed to another publisher, and they might not want to work with you, stuff like that. And not even publisher side of it, just like coworkers side. I've had some commentators that was friendly with in the beginning, and then we kind of like grew apart and kind of started to not like each other, and that kind of stuff down the line. You never know what that person is going to be. You never know if they're going to then be the talent manager for an event, and they're going to be like, oh, fuck that guy. He was an asshole to me back in the day. I don't want to hire him. Or someone who works for a publisher and is like, yeah, we don't want to include you in this game. So I'm not saying to please everyone, but I'm also not saying that you aren't allowed to express your feelings. Just I'd say be careful about it. Do you want me to focus more on like the technical aspects? Because I kind of wanted to sit like kind of general of like how to properly set your mind right going into this.
Whatever you felt was best. The technical
Okay.
aspects of it too are really interesting if you want to go into them. But
I mean, I think I'm gonna probably bore a lot of people talking about like how to properly build up hype for play-by-play moments or such.
I disagree. I would be
Really?
fascinated.
Okay.
That's a lot of what the podcast is about is trying to get more of the technical details since I feel like no podcast or content has actually done that.
Okay.
So
So
I find
something
it brilliant.
I've been working a lot with on some of the PUBG mobile talent is like for it's a certain topic of like how to properly convey hype. I think most people out there in esports or just gaming in general will have two monitors, right? You'll have a stream on one screen that you're not really paying attention to, and you're like playing a game yourself, or you're reading an article or something like that. and this is something I learned like really early on that kind of stuck with me, is you need to be able to grab their attention, right? You need to force them to want to look at that second monitor and be like, oh, what's happening over here? So ways you can do that are in terms or in how you get hype. If you're this kind of person who's always really excitable, talking really fast the entire time, your hype levels up here. And if a crazy moment ever happens, you can't really go much higher. You can't you can't really increase your hype level high enough to like pull someone's attention away from what they're doing. So by properly conveying hype, by not like talking so fast all the time, by not being super emotional or speaking super loudly, you can control when you want people to focus on something big, and you can pull their attention back to that screen. And also when conveying hype in particular, there's like two ways to do it in terms of like your pacing and your loudness. And you need to work really well with both of those to be able to properly convey it right. Because you can obviously just get really loud and then people are like, oh, cool. But if you're talking slow, it's just kind of like a little bit awkward. But if you pick up your pacing and your loudness at the same time, you kind of this nice gradual curve into like a hype moment that will really create something memorable. And that's like super kind of like technical stuff. If you look at like Counter-Strike, for instance, it's round based. So if you look at like the hype level, if you were to graph like a hype level, this is like super nerdy. You get like these like peaks at the end of a round, round's over. Okay, you slow back down. You talk about the next round coming up. Action breaks out. You go up again, and you repeat. It's like this nice little like wave, right? If you look at stuff like StarCraft, for instance, I imagine it's more you have these peaks and valleys where okay, the game started up in the 12 o'clock position, it's Violet, so you have this little hype in the beginning to get yourself into the game, but then you have this like slow buildup throughout the entire match until you have these critical points of the GG, right? So each game has like their unique flow in terms of the hype level, the storytelling aspects of it, that you need to understand before you can fully get into a game and really work on such a crucial side of casting, which is that technical aspect of it.
I mean, this is all great stuff from me, man. Something I definitely been thinking on about play-by-play and hype. That's really important to know. I think control is just a very good word in general
Yeah.
for the play-by-play commentators. Controlling your voice so you don't get to any point of shrieking is always a good thing. But then also
Hitting a little
controlling
home with me on that one.
well, it's something I've had to really work with. But because one of the first things I was terrified is of being a very stereotypical, oh my God, why is that woman screaming? So that's why, initially I didn't even want to try play-by-play. And I only did it, I guess recently, it's 3 years at this point. But I feel like I've gotten to a decent point with it, finally. But regardless, like, yeah, the ability to control the narrative, to actually use your voice in the way that you think you're using your voice is something that is very important. And I think the number one reason to be watching your own VODs is to make sure you're communicating correctly what you thought you were communicating. And it's also something that I've been very much in tune with when watching other esports as I try to delve into, casting them and what makes the casting good. Literally today, before this podcast, I was listening to some Valorant stuff from a couple days ago. And I was like, this guy is just constantly on. You know what I mean? He's constantly, you're talking about, he was constantly at this level. So there's nothing higher. And there's nothing lower either. And that's really what makes, our the earworm of commentary, right? We don't have an earworm like a melody, but we have something that's just like, that sounded nice, is when someone's using that full scale. And we have the ability to be kind of, I talked to a hockey guy for one of these podcasts a while ago, and he summed it up so perfectly, but I'm not a music person. But he was like, in esports, it's more of like a melody, right? You kind of have like this little bit of like, the crescendos, and then you kind of going down. Whereas traditional commentary is like dun 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 dun, a lot more. And I was like, damn, that makes a lot of sense. But that is a great thing about esports commentary, is that we can do that. We can control. We're the goddamn like conductors in the orchestra, and you can do that whether your esport is as action packed as Overwatch, which can't believe anyone cast that game as well as they do. That seems like an insane game. Or StarCraft, which is seen as, super slower paced compared to it. So
there's a whole different skill sets you have to have as well across different games. Like StarCraft, I think you need to have a really good personality to tell like stories. I think one thing that makes Tasteless and Artosis so good is the fact that even during downtime, you want to listen because they're really funny, they're really entertaining. Whereas in an FPS, you don't necessarily have that lull in action to have those kind of fun conversations between each other. You're super focused on the game the whole time.
I don't know if you listen to their Valorant casting, but obviously they're kind of new to it. They're getting into it.
Yeah.
One of the first times they've even cast like another game as well, especially for Artosis. But it was so funny because when I first heard them, the first thing I thought was that sounds like StarCraft casters casting an FPS. Like,
I mean, it's true. The same thing happened for
Yeah.
Monte Cristo and Doa. Like you said, Overwatch is so action packed. They're used to League of Legends where they have these big lulls in action to just talk to each other. Like Doa, one of the greatest things about his commentary is the way he can fill dead air. But when he moves over to Overwatch, which is why I think their duo wasn't seen as good, is because he doesn't have the ability to do what he's done best or what he can do best, which is fill that downtime, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also one of those like brand things, and one of those things that you learn when you focus on one esport and one esport only, is that you don't understand, or you don't kind of round yourself out in the sense of being able to be a good commentator. Not saying he's bad or anything, but to be to that kind of same standard that people expect out of you in one game into another.
People said that a lot about Semler as well when he moved to Overwatch, right? Like they
Yeah.
were like, obviously he's a fantastic commentator, one of the best CSGO, but there is, I guess he doesn't just get Overwatch was kind of a common statement. And I think if you were to try and analyze that more than just like people's gut feelings, which can be hard to analyze, if we were to give it a go, it'd be something along the lines of, yeah, that the pacing isn't there. They don't understand like when to hit the crescendos and when to back down a little bit more. And it's very impressive when people can instantly transfer skill sets. And it's very, very nice for when people don't have to adapt, right? Which kind of goes into the genre discussion earlier. So if you can go to an RTS to an RTS, it's probably going to be very similar pacing, even if people try to mix it up. If you go from Valorant, from Overwatch to Valorant, it actually is probably more identical from what I've seen than CSGO and Valorant. Valorant, at least from my perception, has been a lot more of that quick pacing, a lot more of the actions and abilities, whereas CSGO is so much more like, here's the play, here's the setup, they go around, there's the headshot, and Valorant just like, okay, they get the setup and then they're going already. Like, you got to be quick into it. But it's something that is I love the details here. It's what I want to talk about, and so much of the details too that are easily forgotten. People instantly go to detail analysis. They're like, well, clearly you got to be a certain level to have a certain analysis, and that's all well and good. Not going to knock people who want to do that, but the people who
let's
actually
dive into that. Actually, I love that topic.
Go ahead.
100%. Because oh man, I remember this, and it's always, I think it's always a scary topic as a commentator. And I think one of the scariest things you can do as a caster is do show matches. For instance, say you're a color caster in StarCraft, right? I think maybe StarCraft. I think StarCraft is an exception to this rule, because I feel like almost everyone that casts StarCraft can play StarCraft at a really good level, like pretty damn decent. But say you take, and I'm not trying to pick on him, I swear, it's just the example I can think of off the top of my head. Monte Cristo, League of Legends, never a good player. He was never a good player. He was never like high ranked. He was never, from my memory, medium ranked. He was like silver or gold. He was pretty low ranked. Same with Overwatch. He wasn't high ranked, but he catered his analyst work to bypass that by talking and ingraining himself in with teams, by asking them constant questions, by watching their demos, or by watching their scrims live, by listening to their comms. He bypasses his individual knowledge from his perspective of actually playing out these situations, and uses that as a way to get around that. Whereas you have pro players who are transitioning into, color commentator roles, who literally can do super micro analysis. I guess you would say Monte Cristo would do like very macro heavy analysis. And I think most color casters, if you're not a pro player, you do focus on macro stuff. But then when it comes down to like a pro player transition to a color caster role, you go very, very minor, squeak. And I feel like as a color caster who always focuses on macro stuff, which to be fair, even I did. I was always a macro caster. You never want to show the audience how good or bad you are actually as a player, because it's a hit to your credibility, or at least I see it as a hit to your credibility. Which is why I try to avoid doing like show matches, because I don't want people to see, oh, he's doing analyst work for League of Legends or for CS. Oh, he's silver. He's terrible. He can't even hit a shot. And I think especially more towards and I don't want to make this like a sexist topic at all, but I feel like women have even a harder time with that. I think towards like Frankie and CS, who's interviewer, desk host. I feel like whenever she streams, and I even talked to her about this, she gets so much like backseat gaming that it frustrates her because she does her job perfectly, and her ability to play the game doesn't matter to what she can do in terms of the job. But I feel like it's very tough for people in general to have their playing actually seen sometimes if they're not as confident in their gameplay as they are in their talent work.
Yeah, I thought when you said show match, I meant casting show matches, and I was like, what's wrong with that?
Oh no, playing in show matches.
Playing, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. This is another thing that I think you're right is very different. Not just because StarCraft people are generally like good. Like I think our lowest ranked commentator is like Diamond, which is still top 20,
Jesus Christ.
and then most of us are top 2. Well, Match is supposed to be top 2, but anyways. But like and then that's still not enough for like the tryhards in StarCraft, anyways. But it's also because we have to stream, which is one of those things that I don't.
Well, do you have to stream as in for a living to like
For a
keep
living,
income coming
exactly.
in? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. As a living, so it does help with the branding as well, which is something we noted is important. So that's all well and good. It can be a good thing, but it mostly to me, I don't. And like, streaming is not my passion, right? Like I can enjoy it,
Yeah.
but commentating and talking in this podcast is kind of what I'm really excited to do. So I would rather be someone who can be up on stage, all the time and make my living off of that if I could, not only because it's what I like to do, but it's also like, I feel like there's not as much question because you're not forced to constantly show your gameplay.
Right.
And people don't, they can't come into your chat and be like, lol, only Masters 2, not GM, lol.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of envious of other people for that. And I feel like Overwatch was a good example because so many of those guys that got picked up were very much so not from a playing community. They were the commentators or they were commentators on another game. They got brought in. And there was really no question. If one was the analyst and one was the play-by-play, I feel like I haven't heard many people question the analyst's skill level. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but I just feel like it's not as much because it's not a point to their commentary. It doesn't have to be anyways. But if they start streaming, if they start doing show matches, as you were saying, then maybe suddenly it's a very easy dig.
I think to be fair, it just depends on how you take it as well. I feel like when you get to more of like the elitist type of games, I think Overwatch isn't an elitist game. I think like the old guard of like StarCraft, Counter-Strike, and maybe Dota are more of like the elitist because they've been around for decades. I think maybe the newer games, it's not too big of a deal, though maybe like Valorant is maybe an exception because people are expecting you to be like good at the game kind of thing. But yeah, like Overwatch, like people would listen to Monty and I mean, they would have no clue that he would be like a silver or gold player because of how well he does his analysis work. And again, not focusing on micro stuff, or like individual small mechanical plays, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I think it is hard to describe exactly what the difference of that micro versus macro is. Like I totally understand, but
I could try it if you want. I could give it a little go.
Sure, go ahead.
I could try. So to me, when I say macro, I guess we'll throw it into StarCraft terms with my limited knowledge of StarCraft. So bear with me. I mean, macro in StarCraft 2, it's about it's about base management, resource management, and unit management to a degree. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay. And then micro for me is more like you're focusing on a Reaper, you're micromanaging a Reaper to take down, SCVs or drones or probes or whatever. You're specifically focused on that one unit and what it can do. Or macro is you're focused on a giant army and what it can do.
Right.
And then there's obviously like macro stuff inside of it of using, oh my God, I can't remember the names of the abilities, to be honest. The Protoss one that puts the shield up.
Force fields, Guardian shield.
Yeah, exactly.
Storms,
Thank you. Yeah. It's micro and all that stuff. So for me, like macro analysis is, if you look at it in the terms of Overwatch, it's like how the teams are setting up. It's about their like compositions that they're trying to fight with each other in. And then the micro would be more so like how the Genji took advantage of things being on cooldown of the enemy team and using his deflect to reflect a certain ability back to them. And how you can use this one character in a specific way to like win these fights. So that's how I look at when I talk about like macro versus micro analysis. Is that talking about macros is like a lot easier because you're talking about compositions, and if you look at like League of Legends, like this character is supposed to beat this character, and with this character having this support, you should be able to beat this composition. And like, if A beats B and B beats C, then this whole little cycle that goes on. Whereas, yeah, micro would be like that individual play you did to outplay someone or to win something.
So it's kind of interesting you put it that way. I was thinking more like I was gonna say, like, when you listen to pro gamers talk, if there's like a guest cast or something like that, I agree. They're very micro detail oriented, and they're
Yeah.
also very this, then this, then that, then this, right? Because they've seen it 100 times. And even if they're wrong, if it's this, then this, as opposed to that, they can say, oh, well, that's why this happened. And people will trust them as well because they're pros. But
Hmm.
then for analysts who aren't pros, I feel like it's more like there are these options. We could see this option. We'll see what happens. And then this is briefly why that option couldn't work. And we'll see where it goes. There's a lot more I mean, honestly, it sounds like we're saying things that we don't know, but it's more just like
Guesswork.
allowing room for the execution to show because all these games have strategy. So many more of them are actually about the execution. You can set up a crossfire, but if no one shoots well, then, what does it
Right.
matter that you set up the strategy? So that's what I thought you were getting into. But now, actually, the way that you described it kind of sounds like I would think the macro of what you were describing would be the play by play to me. So am I wrong with that?
To some aspect, it's more about like how you set up a fight or break down how a fight happened. If you were to watch an Overwatch fight and you were trying to predict what's going to happen, like talk about how okay they have a Widowmaker in this position, so the team attacking into it, they need to deal with it somehow. Send a Winston at it, send someone who can close that gap at it, or oh they had this composition, a dive comp, so their whole goal is to jump on the enemy supports and kill them off. And then post break or post fight, you break down like, okay, well, their Genji and Tracer got into the back line, they took down their Zenyatta, and then the fight started to break or started to go in their favor because of that dive that came in. Whereas like micro in my head is more like the way this Tracer got into the back line, like exactly how they played that position out, or how that Genji played this position out to accomplish what happened, or more of like the minuscule details that I think I hear our Tosis and Tastes talk about when it comes to StarCraft of like pathing and stuff like that, especially when it comes to like Brood War, of like knowing the pathing details of like how characters work and stuff to get the moat to maximize the most you can out of that unit. Especially like when you have like lurkers or you have vultures or something like that with spider mines to capitalize off of that. I feel like a ex player would be able to look at that and tell you exactly how like they should set something up,
Mm,
or how this one spider mine changed the whole fight, whereas a macro analyst caster wouldn't really notice that 100% because
okay.
they don't play at that level to see those small details.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I also wonder if this is a little bit of the difference of video of games of the esports because when you're describing it, I think it actually makes perfect sense as to what I've heard Overwatch commentators do, which is that the analyst in the game, let's it's not the round,
Hmm.
they're still pushing the card, whatever. And they're like, okay, so we're gonna have a fight soon. We have this person here, this person there, this person there, and then they go ahead and let the play by play go,
Yeah.
bam, bam, boom, wazzle, wazzle. And then when they come back, if there is a lull, they can be like, so this is why it happened. Specifically, the tracer didn't get the bomb off, and this person didn't do that. But yeah, if they that's like that feels like a esports pacing thing, because in StarCraft, I would say it's a lot of the time well, no, actually, I guess it does kind of work. You know what it is? I feel like one is preparation. One is like the hype building, so the hype
Yep.
guy can take it away. Another one is like the lowering, right? The really picking the pieces apart, which some esports allow and some don't because they're so actiony.
I mean, to be fair, like pro players, I think belong more so on an analysis desk than a
Mm,
commentary
hmm.
duo, just because of the whole storytelling aspect and the charismatic level you need to be at. I feel like there's a lot of pros who don't hit that kind of level, and I think storytelling, like I think breaking out a fight's great, but breaking out a fight in a way that's relative to the story you're trying to tell within the match is completely different, and is something that a lot of like pro players don't understand or don't know how to do without the practice of it.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. 'Cause that's one of the big topics, is a lot of the time people be like, you can't be the color commentator unless you're a professional because they'll say like you can't do the analysis. But then I absolutely agree that I think that the commentary duo, and we are going to duo limit today, no trio questions, are they're trying to make this cohesive story that's easy to follow, that has important details mixed in, but only if it's necessary, only if it flows well, right? And then it's the analysts afterwards who really get to pick it apart and tell a
Yeah.
different type of story that's more fitting for a segment that has a little bit more time for room. Whereas, during a broadcast, a cast, it can't really happen. And I think that's a brilliant way to sum it up, what I've been trying to explain to some people who come into my chat and are like, "You're not a pro. How can you be an analyst?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, first of all, StarCraft doesn't really have it." And I'm like, but that was a very good way to put it. Like, and you brought up storytelling, which is also one of the driving forces of commentary. That people, it's the biggest driving force of commentary. It seems like it's one of those things that you kind of have to wiggle out of people, like draw out of people. They'll talk about, like in this podcast, right? We had a lot of things to discuss. It's been almost an hour and a half, and then we come to commentary, and we're like storytelling. And if I asked you, is storytelling the most important thing to commentary, would you say yes or no?
I mean, it depends on. I think you need to be more specific on it for me to be able to answer that. Like,
Do
in
you
what
think
sense? Like, as a skill to be able to storytell, or do you mean like that's the most important aspect that people listen to, or?
do you think that the role of a commentator is to be a storyteller, or do you think that there's something different that a commentator must strive to be?
I think, yeah, I think storytelling is one of the like most important aspects of a commentator, especially a play-by-play Actually, yeah, as a commentator, period. Doesn't matter if you're an analyst or you're a play-by-play or color or play-by-play, because you need to be able to get the viewers invested into what they're watching, and
Hmm.
the easiest way to do that is the stories behind it. If Flash was amazing in Brood War and now he's struggling in StarCraft 2, people are like, oh, that's interesting. Like, oh, he was so dominant when it came to Brood War, but now he's struggling in StarCraft 2. And then he starts to do well in a tournament. You're like, oh, this might be the time. Maybe Flash is finally, locked into what he needs to do in StarCraft 2 to win. And then he goes on to win the tournament. People are like, holy shit, that's so epic.
Hmm.
And I feel that's like massively important, is to find those important storylines and then obviously convey it in a proper way.
But that's, I mean, I'm glad you kind of agreed at the end. But that seems to be a trend, is that people would be like, yeah, like you're trying to tell a story. A lot of commentators come in and they're like, I need to talk about what's on the screen in front of me. Okay, I need to be more analysis. I'm going to talk about why the screen on front of me is doing what it does. And then eventually it feels like everyone figures out that actually what is fascinating to people is like the human story behind it,
Yeah.
and connecting all the strings so that you can say like this game is important in this series because the series is important today because today is important for the tournament, and this tournament's important because it's the global, and so on and so forth, which can
It's making
also
people care. It's making people
exactly,
care about that match on that particular day, but to
yeah,
be able to make them do that every time.
to try and find something that like is very easily attached to, so that if the if StarCraft Twitter actually worked, which it doesn't really, they would be able to clip me say this is the most important time in Jaedong's career, this is his last event as a professional player, whatever. That would be clippable, and people would be like, oh man, that sounds amazing, I want to see this guy, I have no idea who he is, haha dong, like, and then that brings people in. But if you clip someone saying, okay, so Jaedong's going to go for a 12 pool right now, and that 12 pool is going to perhaps do damage, like it's like,
Yeah.
some
It's the
people will enjoy
highlight
it, but
reel. It's the highlight reel commentary, right? It's, you
yeah.
want it to sound epic, and when you look at any highlight videos or you look at like recap videos of a tournament, you want those one-liners that stand out.
That's another thing I think is like actually really crucial for a play by play, to try and not fit, like you don't want to force it necessarily, but to try and if you could sum up something in a line and then make it clippable, I think that producers really like that when you can just
Yeah.
clip it and get
Oh
it
man.
done with it.
And the worst part is that you sometimes work with these color casters, or even, I guess it goes both ways. Let's be honest, it goes both ways. Who don't realize commentary is like a selfless job.
Hmm.
Is you can't be selfish when you're casting with someone. You need to do what you can to make them perform better. So if I'm color, I need to properly build up to a fight. And when the fight breaks out, I need to hand it off to my play-by-play caster so he can do what he does best. I don't want to jump in there or even like a GG moment. If it's his job to have those one-liners at the end of a game, or it's his or her job to break down the fight and have the final GG moment, as a color caster, I shouldn't be jumping in because you mess up the whole flow of the show. Or you mess up the highlight reel as well by coming in and talking, unless it's obviously something like super crazy, right? But you have to like realize, like as a color caster, it's not my job to be in the highlight reels. If I don't hear my voice in a recap of this insane match, then I have to be okay with it because it's not my job to do that. It's not what I'm hired to be. It's not my role in the duo. And I need to help the person I'm casting with be able to nail that perfectly. That's my job. It's not to have that one liner.
Mhm.
And I feel like some people who come into commentary don't realize that. And I've been hearing it a lot lately where you'll have like the color caster, which some of it's authentic, but some of it's kind of forced because they just want to get in there. They'll like make sounds when they don't need to, or they'll try to like give emphasis on something when they don't need to, and it ruins an entire clip that could be something that's seen years later as being one of the most epic moments in that game. It's a lot of selfless stuff you have to do within commentary, even if you're play-by-play. If you want to look at the other way, just because I know how or why this fight took place or what led up to the fight or what happened in the fight, it's not my job to break that down. It's my job to let the other guy do that and to ask him questions. Sorry, him or her questions. I just keep saying him in general. Ask them questions to help them look good, to help them break down the analysis properly, to help them look smart and like a genius and like, they saw this coming. And I think like a lot of the newer commentary with the whole idea of like building your own brand and stuff like that kind of gets lost in the craft of what commentary duos should be doing.
I think there's some genuine crossover potential, right? Especially depending on your game.
Yeah.
Sometimes analysis can kind of hype with analysis just because they're so invested in the analysis type of situation. But I think you're ultimately like overall right. I mean, I've certainly been in that position where I realize like I need to shut the hell up. Like no sounds. This is super epic. He's really going to call it. I've
Yeah.
been in the other position where I was like, why did you interrupt me? Like I was
Exactly.
building up. I was going to the GG. God damn it. But it is about being selfless and trying to recognize like when it is time to let either the actions speak or your co-caster speak. It is a selfless job, but it's such a difficult job to say that of when the branding is so important. When you're like
Yeah.
either trying to have people acknowledge that you're smart and you know the game, but you're relegated to the play-by-play role. What do what do you do to try and let them know I do know the game as well? Or vice versa, when you're the color guy and you want them to know that you're there. You want to be on the highlight and the sizzle reel, and you can't because you don't really get those hype moments. Because it is a little bit of having, not having an ego, but it's a little bit of having to have an ego to a degree. Like you
Yeah.
kind of
Especially as a
have
commentator.
to,
Exactly.
to be on air and do these things and build your profile as well. And that could be a whole nother discussion we could go into about how you do that balancing act. There's so many things in life are a balancing act. But
Yeah.
I do not want to take up too much of your time. It's been a very fast 90 minutes. Say that right off the bat.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I absolutely loved your perspective on things. I think you really summed up a lot of topics that I've been thinking about recently. So thank you so much for that. I do have one last question because you made sure to point it out. Do you have a hype song?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I mean, we didn't even get into the parts of like, tell me your favorite stories in esports over your career. Because I definitely have some there. I think one of my hype songs is Thunderstruck by AC/DC.
Mm.
I have a lot of like good memories behind that where during LCS you've been to Cologne, right? You've been to Germany.
Yes.
Okay. And it can get ridiculously hot here, and the country does not believe in air conditioning.
Yeah.
So one year in 2013, during the LCS summer relegation matches or promotion matches, we're in our studio in Studio 2. There is 2 air conditioners who both broke because it was too hot. There was a barbecue happening outside, and you have me, Joe Miller, Demon, and Quickshot blasting AC/DC Thunderstruck, waiting for the technical difficulties to finish so we can finally get back into the game, just like singing and just blasting the music over the speakers in the studio and like DJing it up. And for me, like because of that, that's one of my hype songs to get me in the mood.
That's a nice story. That's a nice memory too.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the first times I was in Germany was for a home story cup years and years ago, and it was like the super small, cramped space, no air conditioning, and they decided to like barbecue things and hand us like
Yep.
steaming hot plates of like sausages, and I'm like, this, I don't want
You
this.
you were at the hotel down the street, I bet as well, right?
Oh yeah,
That has
the
no air conditioning and it's stuffy
exactly.
as hell.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, and my
terrible.
window, by the way, opened right next to the fire escape, which was like because it was like a two-tiered, like the ceiling of the next building was like there, and my room was here.
Hmm.
And so people could easily climb from the roof, which they were allowed to be on. There was like 5 guys with their shirts off on that roof, could easily climb into my bedroom from the fire escape into my very open window. Very questionable.
That's a lot of things I could ask about that.
Well, fortunately, they never did. They seemed to be gentlemen.
Oh, you said fortunately or unfortunately?
I said, fortunately, they were
Oh, okay.
gentlemen. Unfortunately, I'll be. Anyways, yeah, the story though is that yeah, Europeans get AC. Okay, it's gonna be the way of the future. All right.
They always complain. It's only hot here one week in the year, but when it gets hot, it's like 40 something degrees Celsius, which is over 110 degrees
Yeah.
or 100 degrees.
I don't care if they're telling me that the week I'm visiting. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like,
Oh,
come
it's
on.
always the week you're here. Always.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good hype song. I like that one. Been listening to that on my runs as well.
Oh, good song for that.
Yeah. I guess you got to tell at least one esports story. Good old hot Germany. But now that's gonna wrap it up. Do you have any shout outs you want to do, or where people can find you, what jobs you're currently working?
I guess. Oh, first of all, shout out to you for doing this. It's been a pleasure being on the show here. I think I need to give like obviously I think I always give a shout out to my parents for supporting me in what I do, for supporting me through making the YouTube videos, for supporting me going to Germany, even though I'm the baby of the family. My mom and dad didn't want me to go, but they've always been very supportive of what I'm doing and willing to help out anyway. Obviously, so I have to give a shout out to Joe Miller and ESL for even giving me the opportunity to do this job. And I guess for like the last almost 2 years now, I have to give a shout out to my girlfriend because she's been putting up with me being gone for months at a time, which is something we don't really even talk about, right? Is the travel part of esports as talent and how it affects your relationships and your mental, well, just your mentality when it comes to life. And then yeah, I'm working on the ESL CS:GO Pro League at the moment. I'll be doing some PUBG Mobile stuff later on in May, and maybe some other games here or there in between. And you can check me out on Twitter at @JKaplan or on Instagram at @JKaplan, but a one instead of the L because the person who has at @JKaplan is a bot account, and I can't seem to get control of it to take it. So thanks, Instagram.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. I look forward to watching you on the CS:GO. Actually, I've been watching a little bit of PUBG recently, so maybe I'll catch you in May as well. But yeah, whatever you do, man, it's been an awesome conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it out there. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for episode 30. See ya.
Bye.